Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you. I'd like to say it's lovely to see you, but I can't actually see you, and I've no real idea whether any of you can see me. But hopefully you can. We've got quite a lot of people who've joined us live, and we'll obviously be recording this evening, so you'll be able to watch it to your heart's content over and over again. Which I can't think of anything more terrifying than listening to me over and over again. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Mr. Sizer. I'm the deputy head. And one of my jobs in the school, one of my main jobs, maybe my most important job, is to oversee Key Stage 4, which is years 10 and 11, which your son or daughter has just entered and is about 3 or 4 weeks into Key Stage 4. Joining me tonight is Miss Connor, who hopefully is about to come up on the screen. Give you a wave. There we go. Joining me is Miss Connor, who's of course the head of learning for year 10, and she's known the year group for all of last year as well. So what do we want to get through tonight? We've sort of set ourselves a limit of 15 minutes, which gives us about 30 seconds per slide, and I think I've been talking for longer than 30 seconds on this slide already, and the last words that my producer in my ear mentioned just before we went live was, he's never going to get through this in 15 minutes. So I will do my best, and hopefully Miss Connor will take over and be able to get through most of it. But what we are aiming for this evening, well, we're going to talk about the changes to GCSE. Some of you may know some of the changes, some of you may be new to it. So we're going to assume a blank sheet of paper, and therefore you can learn what the new GCSEs are like. We're going to explain what's going to be expected of students and what we expect them to achieve, and the way that which parents can help. But I'm going to start with Miss Connor and hand straight over to her. All yours, Katie.
Okay, so we wanted to talk about attendance and punctuality. The expectation from the school is 97% minimum, and you'll notice that there is an asterisk next to that. So Mr. Sizer is going to talk about the caveat which is in place for that just this year. Later on. So the expectation is to be on time to school, to lessons, to take responsibility for wearing the correct uniform, to have the correct equipment. I think it is perhaps worth mentioning here that it has been discussed in tutor time, so things like coloured pencils are now an expectation, and a glue stick, given that it's not ideal to be sharing equipment like that, which we have done previously. It's also an expectation that behaviour will be appropriate and conducive for learning for everybody, so not for just your individual children, but for everybody. Okay, so a story about a boy called Sam. So Sam's attendance was, he's absent half a day every week. Okay, that equates to 90% attendance. So in year 7, Sam's 90% attendance rate means that he's missed the equivalent of 4 whole weeks of lessons during that school year. If that poor attendance then continues, and Sam continues to only attend for 90% of the time over the 5 years, then he'll miss about 1/2 of a whole school year over the whole of his secondary school career. Okay, so research suggests that 17 days missed from a school year equates to a drop in a GCSE grade, and then that does equate to a 91% attendance rate. So when we think about the story of Sam, the 17 days and how quickly that stacks up, we're just trying to show how important it is to be here. It's vital for success at GCSE. So research done by Sarah Burnell shows that it's basically showing this in another way. So if your attendance is below 90%, then the average grade for a student like that with that level of attendance is going to be a D, whereas if we look at the other end, so 97% and above, the average grade is an A-. So that speaks for itself. It's absolutely vital for success at GCSE.
Okay, thank you, Miss Connor. So we talked about that 90%. There's not many exams that you would do if you didn't get 90%. You'd actually be getting an A grade, or even an A* grade, or actually a 9, as we'll see in just a moment. But actually a 90% attendance is really quite poor and can have a real impact. So the single biggest factor in success at school both socially, and I talk to the students about this on a fairly regular basis, both socially but also academically, is being here. You've got to be here and then you'll succeed. You've got the resource of your teachers, the resource of your tutors or the pastoral support. If you're here, you can make progress. If you're not, you can't. But as Miss Connor said, there is a slight caveat attached to that, because you may have noticed there's a global pandemic on. And so, of course, there's going to be a fair number of students who at any given time might not be allowed to be here. So, for instance, if you are ill with COVID symptoms or even symptoms that are similar to COVID, we've sent a number of students home over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks. And obviously some parents are choosing to keep their children at home, quite rightly, because they are self-isolating or they're awaiting a test result. I mean, if you've got symptoms, you should be getting a test. Certainly a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we were getting stories that, we heard the stories in the press, but actually even locally amongst our students and staff, we were hearing stories that it was taking weeks to, days and days to get a test and having to travel far away to get one. Well, actually in the last week, we found that's less the case, and that we've had students who've got tests that have all come back negative, mainly. Literally overnight, and they've managed to get them quickly and then get the results within 24 hours. So hopefully it won't be as big a job as it was only a week ago. But starting with the second bullet point there, if there is anybody who's self-isolating or awaiting a test result, we have a system whereby you will be added to a students out of school group on class charts. And then the work for you and your year group will be put on that group. Only you'll be able to see it. Now, some of our students who've been on it have said, well, OK, I'm struggling with this piece of work, or I finished this and I want a bit of an extension work. What we recommend in those circumstances is you contact the teachers for any issues or any problems, because the office, Miss Connor can't necessarily, tutor can't necessarily help. Actually, what you need to do is contact them, and you can do that via email, more of which in a moment. We do also have a plan for remote learning in general, and this is based on the government restrictions that may be put in place. And there are 4 tiers. This is not our system, this is the governmental system, but we have a plan that we will spring into action should we need to use it. We're currently at tier 1, which means the school is open as usual for all students, but we have a handful of students at any given time isolating. And that goes through to tier 2, where we may have year group rotation. So it could be, in the case of year 10, maybe in for a couple of weeks, then out for a couple of weeks, and then in for 4 weeks, and then out for another 2 weeks. We don't know. Tier 3 is a wider school closure, but with some year groups in. So if I'm honest, the priority, I guess, at the moment would be year 11 and year 13 on the basis that they've got exams coming up this year. But it could easily be year 10 and year 11 and year 13 that we're in. Who knows? We'd have to see what we were advised on that front. And then tier 4 is a repeat of the full lockdown that we saw pretty much in March. But we are currently at tier 1, and we are hoping beyond hope that we stay at tier 1. And your guess is as good as mine as to whether that remains. But hopefully, if people follow the rules, we may be lucky enough to be able to stay at tier 1 in the southeast of England. But this is an opportunity, I suppose, because there's an opportunity for questions at the end, and I kind of got half a mind that many of the questions may be about COVID. So I'll give you a reminder of the sorts of things that are happening with COVID in the school and how we are trying to mitigate against the spread of COVID. First of all, you probably know about staggered break times, lunch times, end of the day, to keep year groups away from each other. So we have year groups in bubbles of themselves, but not in bubbles of classes. As well as that, where appropriate, we have one-way systems. We have entry and exit to school buildings, often one way, or ideally from outside. So any classrooms that have outside doors, we're using those rather than coming inside. And at break time and lunchtime, we have like year zones. So year 10 have their own particular area and are supposed to stay in that area except when they go and get some lunch. But even then, they've got an area of the hall that they go to and just one side of the canteen that they use. There are hand sanitizers all over the school. You can't really walk more than about 20 yards without coming across a hand sanitizer that can be used, and we get reports that they run out, which is what's supposed to happen, and then they get refilled. And what we're asking for from now on, really, but we're going to make it mandatory on Monday, is that we are asking students and staff, when they're in corridors waiting to go into lessons or coming out of lessons and traversing through the corridors, and it's only in certain corridors where there is high turnover of students where they're coming along corridors, we're asking that they are wearing masks, and that's for the protection of the staff and also the protection of the students. And I'm guessing all students have got masks, because you can't go in shops or anywhere like that without them now. So we need all students to be bringing masks in. Of course, the same on buses. Haven't got buses mentioned on there, but we have lots of students who come in on the bus, and we would, you know, it's not just us asking, but students need to use masks. We need to wear masks on the buses. We've picked up a few students who are being a bit difficult about that. Can't say any of them in year 10, but we need those reported to us, and then we'll deal with them, because I think safety on the buses and looking after the health of each other, but also the health of the drivers, is extremely important. So they need to wear them on the buses. In the classroom, things are slightly different. You would see things that are different. Some staff are wearing visors and masks to teach lessons in. The lessons are all front facing, so students are all facing forward. All students squirt their hands with sanitizer at the start, and then tables are all sprayed down, and any equipment like computers and things are sprayed at the end, and then students will go out. What we're going to ask is students put their masks on before they go out from Monday, so that they are ready to be wearing their masks in the corridors. Things have been pretty smooth so far, and the students have actually been really good, and I would like to thank them for their understanding really with each other and for the community, because it actually only works if we all do it together and we all help each other out. Of course, we have a remote learning plan because things are different. So if we think back to March, you know, the spring and the summer, earlier in the year, we went on a very steep learning curve. Staff went on a very steep learning curve, students went on a very steep learning curve, and really we've identified a plan for how we're going to develop remote learning. And actually this idea of blended learning, where you're learning at home and you're learning in school, is probably something that may be with us for some time, and actually in the world of people working from home, may be with us forever. Who knows? But there are 4 key apps that students need to know about, and they will do. Many of them will do already, but they need to become fairly adept at certainly using class charts, Outlook, OneDrive and Microsoft Teams. All the work that they do will be on those 4 apps by and large. So giving you an idea of some of the things that they need to be able to do, well, for instance, they need to be able to log into their class charts to view homework. You can submit homework on class charts as well. I'm sure there isn't anybody who doesn't know how to do that, but if there is, we need to know who they are. You need to be able to check homework. You need to be able to check emails. You need to be able to write messages and send emails to each other and to staff with questions and things. You need to be able to use OneDrive to create and save Word documents and PowerPoint documents and other things, and then being able to submit them in Microsoft Teams. So you can do the work at home, save it on OneDrive, submit it via Teams, and then on Teams you need to be able to join live lessons and recorded lessons, because if we come to remote learning, then there'll be a mixture of all of these things that will be needed. Now at the moment we're not there. At the moment we're in tier 1, but should we go to tier 2 or 3, or heaven forbid tier 4, then these tools are going to be absolutely essential for us to be able to continue to learn. So I'm not going to read all this to you, but there is a plan for if school closes, and we're going to use this plan on snow days as well. I mean, I'm looking out my window at the moment and it's a lovely sunny evening, but I'm guessing come January that might not be the case. So if we have snow days, we're going to use this plan. Learning review days, which are going to be done virtually this year, but will still not involve students in school. They will be remote learning days, if you like, where there'll be 6 lessons a day for those 2 days, and we'll be using some of these tools to be able to do that. There's a little box at the bottom which I think is the crucial thing that I really want you to notice. That if we've got any students that can't log on to email, there's a way of finding out what your password is. If you've forgotten class charts code, email tutor, and if there's too much work, well, you know, from remote learning advice there as to what to do, but to talk to us, and email is the best way of doing that. But there'll be more about this. The students will get all of these lessons and how to do this through tutor time over the course of the next few days and weeks. But hopefully none of it will be needed until Learning Review Day on the 10th and 11th of December. Okay, Miss Connor, I think I'm back to you.
So, and the reason that we've introduced on the remote learning days is the tutor time is to get things off to a good start. So we want to talk about punctuality. We've talked about attendance, but it's important to mention punctuality. So 3 minutes late to a lesson might seem like nothing, but when we add that up, that's 18 minutes per day. That's 3,420 minutes a year, which adds up to 57 hours a year, which equates to 68 lessons a year. And then over the period of the GCSE course, that's 125 lessons missed. And then that equates down to a 94% attendance rate. So we've already seen the impact of poor attendance, which is under the 97% target that we're aiming for. So it might seem like nothing, but actually it delays the start of the lesson for individual students, but also for the whole class and for the teacher, and ultimately it's going to impede progress. Okay, so we just wanted to stress the importance of being on time and being ready for the lesson.
Thank you, Ms. Connor. Absolutely. Be here, be on time. Simple rules for success really at GCSE. So I want to talk briefly about the new GCSE. Now, this might be new for some of you, it might not be new. If you've had any siblings through in the last 2 or 3 years, you'll know all about the new GCSEs, but if you haven't, you may remember GCSEs from when you did them. They are different now to how they used to be. So just going to briefly run through how they're different. Well, the simple, most obvious way that they're different is they're harder. There's no getting around that. They are harder. One of the ways they're harder is there's very little coursework. In fact, in most subjects, there's no coursework at all. Nearly all the exams are linear, which means you do 2 years of study and then you do 2 or 3 exams in the summer of 2022. There's a few subjects where that's not the case. We'll come to in a minute, and it's possible if you're studying iMedia that actually what we have done over the last 2 or 3 years, or the last couple of years certainly, is iMedia students, so not media GCSE but iMedia, have actually done their exam at the end of year 10, and it's been very successful because then they can spend year 11 concentrating on the coursework, of which there is an element, there's a high element of that in iMedia, which is different to other subjects. Now that is our plan for this year, but of course who knows what's going to happen this year, so we are flexible about that. Obviously if we lose a lot of teaching time, we won't enter year 10 students for their iMedia exam at the end of year 10. But we'll see what happens. As I said, most subjects are solely assessed by examination, but subjects like art, obviously, and D&T, food and PE, subjects like that clearly have coursework in a non-examined assessment, NEA as it's known, but they are worth less. They're not worthless, they're two separate words there, but they are worth less than they were. So whereas in the good old days of the old GCSEs, they used to be worth 50% or sometimes 60%, now they're worth 30% and 40%, depending on which the subject is. So there's much more of an emphasis on exams. In the olden days as well, in the good old days, and the good old days weren't always good, but in the good old days, they used to be able to choose whether you do the higher tier or the lower tier. Well, now everybody does the same papers, and except in maths, science and languages, where there is a decision to be made about which tiered entry, you do the foundation tier or the higher tier, and that decision is made basically sort of probably by February, March time of year 11. So it's not something to worry about now. But obviously, if you do higher tiered papers, that allows access to the higher grades, more of which in just a moment. The higher grades are different. As you probably know, we no longer have A through to G. We now have 9 to 1. And the thresholds have changed. So if I show you a graph here, this is something that you can see on the top. It says 2017. So it's quite nice. It's a nice graph we've used for a few years of a comparative of what the grades mean. They're not exactly the same, but you can see that the cutoff, whereas before people used to aim for a C, as a C grade at GCSE previously would open doors to further education. Well, that's now a 4, but you can see that actually a 4 is a slightly lower level than a C, but it's still considered to be the standard pass. If you don't get a 4 in at the end of year 11 in English and maths, you have to do them again in year 12, whatever you're doing. So if you've gone off, if you're doing A levels, you have to do them. Most of our students stay on in the sixth form. you'd have to do them in the sixth form. If you're off doing health and beauty somewhere, or agriculture at agriculture college, or you've gone to BCOT to do a vocational course, you'd still have to do English and maths if you haven't got the 4. So it's important to get the 4 if you can. A strong pass is considered a 5. So that's considered a strong pass, which usually is the grade which opens doors for A levels and sixth forms and sixth form colleges. But often that's based on different subjects. So some subjects will require a 6. And the equivalent of the highest grade, so whereas previously we talked about A star and A, we're now talking about 7, 8 and 9, and the 9 is the highest grade, and far fewer students receive a 9 than previously 3 or 4 years ago used to receive an A star. But that's roughly how it works. So how has it changed as well? Well, in English, for example, there's a greater emphasis on spelling, punctuation and grammar. You don't do a speaking test anymore, but you still have to do the speaking assessment, and you have to have ticked it off to say you've done it, but it doesn't contribute to your overall grade. In maths, some of you may remember, although possibly not, we used to do a statistics GCSE as an extra GCSE, and actually when the new maths GCSE came on board, we decided we couldn't do that because actually maths is much deeper and broader, and actually they have more teaching time as a consequence, so they lost the statistics GCSE. In science, you no longer get assessed on practical activities, but you have to do the practical activities, but you don't get a grade in it. And when you do those practical skills, you learn the skills, you learn the methodologies, you learn the results, and then you're assessed on those in a written exam at the end of the course, in your case 2022. Similarly, in geography, you have to do field work. So students in year 10 and year 11 will go out and do field work locally. They do it locally in Burfield, but also go further afield to places in the south of England. But instead of doing a piece of coursework based on that field work, which is what used to happen, now the students will have those skills assessed in a written exam. So it is quite, I don't know, it could be quite scary. It's much harder than it was. And the key thing about these is the grades. If I just go back to the grades, you get a grade not based on how well you've done. So if you don't meet a certain criteria and get a grade, you get a grade based on how well you've done compared to how well everybody else has done. So it's a bit like a race. It doesn't really matter what your score is. What matters is where you place in the system, in the entire country. But if all of that sounds scary, what I would like to say is, just skip past this, don't worry. We haven't got the results from this summer because obviously the results this summer, the students did not sit any exams, but this is from the year before, and these are similarly in line for our GCSE grades for the previous 3 or 4 years prior to that. I've been teaching for a very long time. I don't really want to say how long. I've been at the Willink for quite a long time. I have never been more confident of the cohort of teachers that we have in the school and of the middle leaders that we have in the school who are driving this success. So the heads of English, the head of maths, the head of science, the head of humanities, the head of geography. Well, the trouble is, once you start mentioning people, then you have to mention everybody, because really there's very few, if any, weak links in our middle leadership, and the quality of teaching is great, and that is why we get such good results. So really it's about making sure that you do what your teacher tells you to do, and if you do that, you will succeed, because actually we all want the same thing and we know exactly what we're doing, and I am supremely confident about that. Over the next few weeks, your sons and daughters will start to get target grades, and these target grades are based on Key Stage 2 attainment, back when you did SATs and Key Stage 2, and they basically give a comparison to how well what somebody who got those grades at Key Stage 2, what you might expect them to get at GCSE. And you've had already flight paths. So the flight paths in years 7, 8, 9 in Key Stage 3 have been over a range of grades. What will happen at GCSE is that will be narrowed down. So if you've got a flight path of 6 to 7, you'll get a grade. You'll have a target grade of 6 or 7. If it's 4 to 5, it will be 4 or 5, and so on. But those target grades are useful because although we would want students to stretch beyond them and do well and overachieve, they give us a benchmark as where to be worried about underachievement and where to put intervention and where to support students who aren't quite getting it right. So target grades are important, but only because they're very useful for helping us to to identify where we need to help students. Again, something we're very good at. So, Miss Connor.
Okay, so in terms of monitoring progress, and Mr. Size has already mentioned intervention. So Sir's already said, listen to your teachers, do as you're asked, and you will be successful, is the crux of it. I'm here to oversee the year team. We've got Miss Johnson, our pastoral assistant, and Miss Browning and her inclusion team to help where it's needed. We've got learning review day. Mr. Size has already said that those sessions are going to be completed remotely, and it's going to be remote learning kind of rehearsal for students on that day. We've got parents evening, 3 reports as you've had previously. I think it's worth mentioning that it is the expectation to aim for a 4. So 4 is outstanding, 3 is good, and I will be worried if people are on less than a 3. So if we're aiming for a 4 and it's an area of concern if it's less than 3, then I think that's worth mentioning. Intervention in maths and English takes place in tutor times, and Mr. Size has already mentioned about iMedia and internal exams all being well in the summer term, but students will be prepared about that and given further information as those dates approach. Another way of monitoring progress can be, so Successful 6 isn't a new thing, this has been in place for a couple of years, but it is a way for you to get a real-time sense of how your son or daughter is doing. It would be expected that they would be getting 6 of these for each lesson each day, and so if that consistently is not being the case, then that could be the cause of or the trigger of a conversation at home as to why that's not happening or where things are going wrong. I think it's also important to mention homework, so there will be more. You will notice a step up. It's going to be about 1 hour a week per subject, which is a change from the last 6 months. Class charts, so students need to download the app and look at homework and attitude to learning. Remember that there's a parental login for class charts as well. It's important to manage time when doing homework and set a routine for it, so don't be leaving it all till the last minute. If it does seem excessive, then please do contact us and we can look into it. Homework club is normally by invitation only, but is not currently running at the moment, but when that is back up and in place, then we can pass that on and let you know. I think it's also worth thinking about the best places to do work at home, or whether that needs to be perhaps in the library at lunchtime if that's possible, or wherever it's going to be, to make that successful and a worthwhile use of time rather than dragging it on and on and on.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So this is not normally, I don't normally do this slide, how can parents help, but I wanted to this year because I have a child, my daughter is in year 10, so I feel your pain, if I'm honest. And so going back to the previous slide, I understand all of these things, and interestingly, you know, the idea, people talk about homework and getting it done, but actually one of the issues is it being excessive and young people spending too much time doing homework, and actually getting them into a routine, and the time limit is really important, and thinking about the best place to do work. But what I did want to talk about is, well, how can parents help? And this can seem quite difficult. Chat regularly about achievements and challenges. I know I can't hear your responses, but probably guffawing at that, because certainly over the breakfast and dinner table, like, what have you done at school today? How did you get on? And you get met with a grunt. But you know, giving encouragement and praise, these things seem obvious but aren't always easy. Help them have somewhere appropriate to study and work. You know, are they working on their bed? Do they have somewhere where they actually can concentrate? A bed is somewhere where you sleep, so it's not necessarily a good place to do work, because you get that association not necessarily correct. It's not easy. You know, year 10 students, 14, 15-year-old young people do not necessarily know how to get into a routine, particularly given the very strange routines that we've all been in over the course of the last 5 or 6 months. So actually working with a routine is really important. Feeding them well, feeding them feeding your children healthily is really important, and getting them to sleep. If they're not sleeping well, that's an indicator that things aren't going to be going well. So if you're concerned about a lack of sleep or disturbed sleep and worries, please let us know. Sometimes, and I speak with much personal experience, sometimes bedtime or just before bedtime is actually a time when things can seem absolutely desperate and temper tantrums can take place, and what woe is me and the world is falling apart and I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do the other. Well, actually, I think our job probably is to listen to that, encourage them, understand, and then maybe in the morning things are a lot better. Sometimes they just need to get it off their chests, I think. But if you are worried, please communicate with us. I mean, my name's not on that list. That's not because I don't want you to communicate with me, but actually, you know, teachers are the ones who really know how to help you with a particular subject, or heads of department, or your son or daughter's tutor, or indeed Miss Connor, or Mrs. Johnson, or myself. Mrs. Johnson's a pastoral assistant, can help. Any of us can help with that. So please contact us if you have any concerns, but maybe don't stress too much. Easier said than done, I know, but actually sometimes young people have just got to make mistakes, and if they don't make mistakes, they don't really learn anything. And one of the issues is about, well, you get a detention because you haven't managed your time very well, and therefore you haven't done a piece of work, or you've got to redo a piece of work because it's not as good as you'd have wanted it to be. Well, actually that helps to develop young people's independence and helps them stand on their own 2 feet. And if they don't do that, then actually they don't learn how to manage it. It's obviously a balance. All of it is a balance, and you know your son or daughter better than we. You know your son or daughter in a very different way and better than we do, but we know them in another different way. So you will know when to intervene and when we can help. But I think it's important that they learn from their mistakes, and year 10 is a good time to make those mistakes rather than year 11, when things get even more serious and take a step up in importance. I do have one phrase. I have one phrase that I use in assemblies, that I use to lots of different people. And this is that idea that when students are working, they should be working. And they should be not distracted with their phone pinging or WhatsApp or Snapchat or whatever. They shouldn't be sitting in front of the TV trying to work. If they're concentrating, well, there's a debate about whether, you know, they should be listening to music. I find it hard to do something that I have to concentrate on with music, because I always want to be engaged with the music. But apparently if you listen to Mozart, it helps you. But I mean, I've never done that, so I don't really know. But and I can't imagine there's many 14-year-olds that would do that. But if they're working, and not trying to do 2 or 3 things at once. Something that might take half an hour, you know, don't pad it out to an hour and a half. Don't spend 2 hours. You don't want your son or daughter spending 2 hours doing something that really should only take an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. So my mantra is, when they work, they work. When they don't, they don't. So it's good to have fun. It's good to relax. It's good to keep up your social life. It's important to play football and go to the cinema. It's important to see your friends. It's important to do all of those things. They should not stop because you're working. What should happen is, when you do work, it's effective and it's efficient, and you and you make the most of it, and then you can make the most of the non-time. Now, we've almost finished, but the last point I wanted to make was really about work experience. Normally at this stage of the evening, we'll say, well, work experience is going to take place, and they'll do it in the activity week, but we still intend to do it. We would love to still do work experience. We're hoping to still do work experience, but it's very much a watch this space, because at the minute we don't really know if it's going to be feasible. Obviously it didn't happen last year for last year's year 10. We'd like it to happen, but we'll see as and when what happens and whether we can do that. So that's work experience. We've covered quite a lot in a fairly quick time. Usually takes about half an hour longer than this in the flesh, so you're lucky. But if you've got any questions, really, I hope you've been in a position to put them up on the screen. I know that we've got 2 or 3 that I can start with, as my glamorous assistant has brought them into me. So one was about, so a couple of questions about remote learning. While we're going to run a test day or a trial day to ensure that it works. Well, actually, our plan is that we're going to use learning review days for that. So we'll have learning review day. They'll go through everything and test things during tutor time, so the students will get an opportunity to see how things work. But actually, we'll use learning review days in December to see that. Obviously, we don't really want to do too many tests another time, because there'll be students out of school, and we don't really want students out of school because they've been out of school for quite a long time. But learner review days will be very sensible use of that time. Another question that's come my way is about how cold is too cold for effective teaching. You've probably seen that you've probably heard, and your sons or daughters have probably said, oh, it's really cold. It has suddenly turned really cold. Less so today, but certainly yesterday I was freezing, and we're teaching lessons with windows open, we're teaching lessons with doors open, because we've been advised that we should be doing that. But we've had some extra advice because it's not really feasible, and this is we're still in September, and we've got this vision of November coming along and being really cold, and how feasible is it to really to have windows and doors open. So actually what we need to balance, and we're going to talk to staff about this, about the need to balance the need to mitigate against the risk of spreading infection against comfort. So yes, it could be too cold for effective teaching, and we don't want that to happen. We have, of course, suggested we don't want students to wear coats in class because that psychologically is not good, but we have suggested if people have got dark coloured base layers that would be okay to wear. But if things are getting too cold, we are certainly going to suggest that they don't need all the doors and windows open. And that's very much a balance that gets made on any given day in different classrooms at different times of the day as well, because certainly it's colder periods 1 and 2, but by the time you get 3 and 4, it starts to warm up. We're also heating on earlier, so that actually it will take the chill off the school in the morning when we do come in and open windows and doors. Hopefully that answers that question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I might be able to see some of the other questions that are available.
So, Mr. Sizer, we've had one question saying about could the children use only one room and stay in a bubble rather than changing rooms as they are now?
Well, we talked and we thought long and hard about that, to be fair, about the best approach to that. The problem with Year 10 is they've done option blocks, and so they're doing different subjects and with different classes. So if they were in the same class, they could do that, but they're not in the same class for everything. Also at Key Stage 3, and I know this is a Year 10 evening, but you may well have younger siblings, I accept. But Key Stage 3, we thought about that as well, but they have to move to separate specialist classrooms. And as well as moving to specialist classrooms, they then have to move through corridors. And we decided, actually, I'm not sure it's in the best interests of the well-being of the students to stay with the same students all the time, and we would like them to move around. So they're in year bubbles, and the idea is to mitigate the spread of the infection rather than actually stop it happening. It's going to be very difficult. So that's why. But in Year 10, it's not really feasible at all. I've got an email, a message here, a question from here that says, talks about missing some lessons due to illness. Is there a more effective way of catching up? If somebody's ill with COVID symptoms, then they will go on the students out of school class charts group. If and they should get the work that way. If students are ill under normal circumstances, well, that's no different to normally the case. But actually what we're seeing is we may well see an increase in the blended learning of students being at home and remote learning, using remote learning to maybe engage students when they're at home. But of course, we really want students in school. So if they're out for COVID reasons, we've got special measures in place. But if they're not out for COVID reasons, well, we'd encourage them to get in as soon as they're well, so the absences are minimal. Longer lessons to minimise movement. Yeah, we thought about that, and we're reviewing everything all the time, but that would involve changing the entire timetable. And if we feel that that's necessary, we'll do it. But it's something I know a couple of other schools have done. Certainly. We can see if anybody has any other questions. We can take those, and we can hang around for a few moments. But otherwise, we've kind of come to the end of the evening. If you have any specific questions that are about your son or daughter, we're not going to obviously answer those publicly, but if you have any of those, we can deal with those individually, and please let Miss Connor or myself or the tutor or whoever know about those. Okay, I don't think it's great television to have me looking at me reading a screen. but that is what I'm doing, I'm afraid. So which of the subjects have different levels, such as advanced, intermediate, etc.? Are the children divided into classes based on this criteria? No, none of the subjects have different levels. They're all GCSEs. So as we said before, the only 3 subjects where you do different exams, you'll either do a higher tier or a foundation tier, are in English, in science, and in MFL. In maths, in science, and in MFL, not in English. In everything else, you do this. Everybody does the same exam. In those subjects, in maths, obviously there are sets. In MFL, everything's in mixed ability and has been for a while. In what was the other one I said? Science are in bands as well, so you have sets in science too. We've got, how can we have a list of equipment emailed to us, please? I'm sure we can do that, Ms. Connor, can't we?
I'm sure we can. Yep, I'll make a note. And
lessons be streamed. We've talked about that, about streaming lessons. So it's possible that, so the question asked about whether we could have lessons streamed. That is, we've looked at that and we've talked about that, and that might be something that we look into in the future, but it does take a lot of technology to get up and running. We've sort of got the technology, but not entirely all of it. It says, after the lockdown, how far behind do you think the children were at the start of the new school year? I'm going to be honest, and some people might not agree with me about this. There's a question about how far behind the children are. I don't think they are particularly far behind, because everybody was locked down and it's the same for everybody. And so I don't think they are. And as I said to you before, the comparative results, the GCSE results are comparative. So you don't meet a criteria. You just how well you've done compared to everybody else. Students missed a good deal of time. There's no question about that. But they have been here through year 7, year 8. And year 9 already, and they missed half of year 9. If we don't miss any more time, I don't have any worries particularly about our year 10s. And I think, actually, to quote Roosevelt, one of my historical heroes, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president of America between 1933 and 1945, he said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I genuinely think there's been too much in the press about, oh, students are behind, they're going to catch up, we're kind of a wasted generation. I don't think that's true. I think actually it's that the students will be fine. And actually, if we tell them they're going to be fine and they just do what they're told by their teachers and they work hard, they will be fine. So I don't think you should worry. I'm not worried, and I know how good our teachers are as well. So another question about, can we please confirm the threshold when a bubble may be sent home? Is it 2 positive infections in a certain time frame, or is it higher? There is no threshold. Actually, what the key is every time we get a positive test, whenever we get a positive test, we are to phone the local authority and we phone Public Health England, and we are then advised by them what we do. So it's different in different scenarios, which is why different schools, you may have, I mean, I know other schools have had positive COVID tests, and some of them have sent home some students, some of them sent home other students, about identifying which students are at risk of infection. And so it's very much dealt with on an individual by individual basis, and we will take guidance from Public Health England. So I mean, that follows on that question. Infections of COVID. There's a question here about the infections of COVID at school that at least 2 students have. Well, I don't believe we're in that position. So if we are in that position, then we will know what we can do about that, because we'll ask Public Health England. But it very much is a movable feast, and it's changing all the time, and we're taking advice all the time. Believe me, we talk about COVID seemingly endlessly, and it would be nice to be able to talk about some other things, but obviously it's very important. We don't have any questions at the moment, so we're going to call that a day. We are going to record, this is recorded and will be published online. But thank you very much. It's been good to see so many people that have joined us during the course of the evening. They've sort of joined in and joined out. Thank you, Ms. Connor. If you have any further queries or questions, please contact us. Otherwise, have a very good evening.
Yeah, same from me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.